Hello, viewers of the internet, and welcome to another Stairway Mountain time trial. Today we start off with this D-Series, D35 in this case, with the dualies on the rear, and a 7.3 litre turbo diesel engine in the front, making 227 horsepower. Unfortunately though, it doesn't feel like 227 horsepower should. It feels like it struggles to get moving on the high end, but then it would because it's a diesel. All the torque and all the performance is on the low end. It's a reasonable car to drive. It's apparently got a heavy duty limited slip differential in the back. This one is rear wheel drive, by the way, and that helps it along. It will still slide a bit though. As I said, all the performance is on the low end, which isn't the best for the grip. But that doesn't matter because it's a dually, meaning it can corner harder than a standard rear-wheel drive D-Series. There's not much more I can say really. I did eventually get the vehicle to the end, and other than a bent wheel, all the damage occurred at the end. The rear axle's pretty solid on here. It's not the easiest thing to kill, although it will bounce if you take it off-road. But overall, a solid vehicle. On to the next vehicle. Now, the next vehicle is the Pigeon Heavy Duty. It's basically a 600cc Pigeon with a wider rear track. And it's nice by Pigeon standards. It's a lot nicer than the 600cc turbo I drove before. The 600cc turbo, I couldn't drive that using any of its power. This, I can use all its power with very little consequence actually. It will tip over, as a Pigeon would, but it doesn't tip over near as badly as you might expect. I believe that may be the rear track helping, and it just tipped there, but I'm back on my wheels and going again. So, yeah. It could also cope with a few of the bumps and things. It seemed less likely to pop the tyres than the 600cc turbo. It was actually incredibly hard to pop the tyres on this. I don't think I ever did pop the tyres. So, yeah. It goes round corners surprisingly well. It has very little straight line speed, and eventually I got it to the end. It did well, actually. I believe this is the first time I drove it down, and it didn't have much damage that wasn't from the bump at the end. So, overall, an interesting vehicle, as in a whole lot nicer than the 600cc turbo I drove before. On to the next vehicle. Okay, so the next vehicle we have is the Auriga Heron, which is a fantasy vehicle made in the style of those from the 1920s. This is supposed to be a 1927. I couldn't find a power figure for it, but a Cadillac engine from that era, a V16, as opposed to a V12 in this, made 165 horsepower. But cars were less powerful then. And as you'll see, the car is very, very long, which means it struggles to get round low speed corners. However, at higher speed sections it does quite well, because the longer wheelbase makes it more stable at those speeds. It's an odd vehicle to drive really. Very, very soft. And a bit odd at lower speeds, as in it just doesn't seem to get going as you would want it to. But that's the way it is. And if I didn't have this on auto mode, it would be much harder to shift with it. Also might mention it weighs 2.3 tons, which is the same as a base model H series. And a lot of that is probably down to the engine and all this wood on the interior you'll see and things. The tyres are pretty primitive though, there's no stager on them, there's just very basic primitive tyres. What I believe is an open differential which causes bits of sliding like that. And overall it's not the worst vehicle to drive, but it could be better. And the time it set was very, very interesting. It just saved itself from being embarrassed by a Roma trike, that dangerous three-wheeled Roma. How that is not what you would want to happen to your lovely prestigious vehicle. Anyway, I got to the end and it survived surprisingly quite well. It took a bit of a beating at the end of the jump though, and yeah, it's a bit fragile if you do throw it into things, but for the most part it copes with the muddy bumps at the side of the track quite well, and it's not bad everywhere else as long as you know how to control it. On to the next vehicle. Next up we have the 8x8 heavy utility truck. This version with no accessories or other such items. It's basically a raised Scania with chunky tyres, or Scania, I don't know how to say it. Anyway, it's not got any Scania branding, but you can tell just by the styling of it and the logo on the steering wheel, it's supposed to resemble a Scania. It's quite nice round the corners, including the lower speed ones, and despite looking like it's tipping over, it doesn't tip over. It's a weird thing to say, but this is a really unlikely vehicle to tip over. I honestly question the physics of this because I could fly into corners, and what should have destroyed the truck, it just took the corner in a way I don't remember any other vehicle taking the corner. It's lovely. The only problem is it's got a bit of understeer and it's held back on the straight line speed parts of the track because it's heavy, but it's brilliant, and it didn't take me too long to get to the end. I believe my first run it was done, and not much damage really. It could even take the bump at the end of a track quite well due to its off-roading nature. So yeah, it did well despite being a big lorry. I would definitely recommend driving it. On to the next vehicle. Next up we have an interesting vehicle. In this case it is the Cement Mixer variant of the T-Series, which is interesting. I couldn't see any cement in the back of it, although it's possible it's got beam cement which may be invisible. That was a corner I've tipped it over at before. As I was getting to, it's easy to tip it over if you corner hard. By cornering gently I was able to get it round the corners quite nicely, but cornering gently slows it down and makes it less potent than its other vehicles. The weight, oddly enough, didn't feel like too much of a problem. I mean, these things are meant to pull the weight along, but it means it's slower on the straights than the T65 and the T75 and worse round corners. And as you might expect, it did quite poorly on the leaderboard. It wasn't last. It beat the Cannon and the remote controlled Covet, but it got beaten by the Aeolus air trike. Yes, that uncontrollable thing that was never supposed to actually be driven on the road. And it beat my lorry, which was a bit annoying, to be honest. Also, I've realised this is my second T75 and it's in a very similar colour to my first T75. But there's not much more I can say about it really. The engine is the same as the other two trucks I've taken down, other than the 8x8 one. I believe that might have had a different engine. And I got to the end in quite neat condition just because of how carefully I had to drive this to stop it tipping over. But jumping over the bump at the end, smashed it up. The chassis got bent out of shape by the cement container thing on the back, which then wanted to roll away and escape to France, but it didn't get very far. Anyway, it's an okay vehicle to drive as long as you're careful, but I would definitely not recommend this as a race car if you had a choice. On to the next vehicle. Now the final vehicle we have today is this barrel of fun, the Gavril Super Sport van. It has, I believe, the same 475 horsepower supercharged V8 as we saw in the Grand Marshal, only it's put down to the road somewhat better in this van, which is odd because it's a van. Anyway, I called this a barrel of fun, with good reason. It likes to roll a lot round corners. Even if it doesn't roll over, you'll see it tips a lot. And combined with the welded differential and plenty of grip and rear-wheel drive, it makes this van great fun to chuck around. Unfortunately, I was only able to get 2 good ones with it, because the rest I tipped it over or flew into a wall from braking too late or something. Remember, I don't believe this has ABS, which is a shame. ABS is all it really needs to be the perfect, fun, chuckable van, and maybe less likely to tip over, but then I guess that's part of the fun. So, yeah, it's nice. As you'll see though, the radiator went there. I don't believe that was from me knocking everything, and that brings me on to our final point about it, other than it being very quick. Our final point is that it's a bit poorly held together, let's say. The engine will go on this. On my first run, I was about 20 minutes slower, and it destroyed the connecting rod bearings just before the finish line, which was annoying because that slowed me down. On this one, I lost the head gasket and the piston rings, but the engine was still running before the finish. It wasn't running for long after I passed the finish, but it made it, albeit with about half the power it had from standard probably, but it's quick. It made it into the under 8 minute club and occupied 6th place on the leaderboard, which was mighty impressive. It also landed the jump reasonably well, having quite soft suspension, and other than a few knocks and bumps I had on the track, the condition was actually really neat. It survived better than the 8x8 utility lorry, which is surprising. Not in a bad way though. This is definitely a vehicle I would recommend to throw around. It's great fun, and that'll conclude our video. Thanks for watching, and goodbye until another day.